And I've made the case multiple times, and I know that most of you that come are here most weeks. So I won't spend a lot of time repeating some of the data that we've been over. But just to get things back in our heads, just for a minute, I feel like this is the need of our day. And I am just seeing this more and more and more. So I'm even more convinced now, since we started the series, of the need to be talking about what it means to be human. And just with technology that's coming and all of the ethical questions, we've got all kinds of questions. I just saw some new stats, on things like IVF, in vitro fertilization. How should we think about those things? I'm seeing new things on what's called MAID. It sounds innocent, but it's medical assistance in dying. Or sometimes traffics under this banner of death with dignity. That's what a lot of the states, when they pass legislation, it's under that kind of heading of death with dignity. Is that ours? Is that ours to take our lives when we feel like we've lived long enough? Or are we under some obligation to live until what we would call natural death? Are we obligated to take medical treatment? Can we forego treatment? How do we make these decisions? So these are massive, massive questions and conversations that we're involved in. And so today, we've been talking about what it means to be human, what it means to be created in the image of God. And I've tried to stress the uniqueness of humans in the image of God. And what I'm trying to do is distance us from the rest of the animal kingdom. So Nathan and I and a few others, we went to a theology conference a few years ago, and Don Fairbairn gave a couple of great lectures that we both referenced multiple times, just had a huge impact, I think, on both of our thinking. And he said, if you imagine a line, like a big, deep line, and you have God above the line, and you have everything else below the line, all right? And he said, that's how it works. God is above the line, everything else is below the line. But then I want you to imagine another line, and you have humans and everything else, all right? So picture that, the hierarchy. There is God, there is his image bearers, and there is everything else. So when we start talking about save the whales, or we start talking about, experimenting on chimps or whatever it is, there are ethical considerations, all right? There are ethical considerations. Don't hear me not saying that. I'm not saying there's no ethical bearing or conversation to be had. What I'm saying is those aren't humans, all right? And we just have to keep these lines clear. And I think we've blurred these. I think we're hitting a stage where we're having to answer some hard questions about where can we blur these lines. I'll give you a couple fun examples, and I'm kind of bleeding into what I want to do next week with technology a little bit. But what do we think of this sort of chimera combination of human and non-human DNA? We use pig hearts for valve transplants, right? Is it valves or aortas or some valves, right? Yeah, thank you. Got my medical people here. We're taking an animal, something below the line, and we're putting it in a human. I don't think most of us necessarily have a problem with the valve. What if you start implanting, DNA from the brain or something like that and injecting it into humans? Like, is that all right? We've all seen Jurassic Park. We know what happens when you start combining things, that things can get a little out of control and unintended consequences and things like that. So these are the types of questions that we're having to think about that the biblical writers, these just weren't necessarily in view because of the science. But my argument is what you have is the foundational material that's sufficient to address these questions. And so what we're doing is taking those principles and reasoning forward. So that's previewing a little bit. Here's what we're going to do for the rest of the study. I am planning 3 more weeks in the study. So we will talk about ethics today and biblical decision-making, this concept of decision-making. That'll be today. Then next week, we will begin a study of technology, so humans and technology, and I plan for that to be a 2-part study. The first week, we'll talk about the basics of the concept of technology. The second week, we're going to get into a little bit more of some of the stuff I just previewed with emerging tech, talking about some of the cyborg conversation, transhumanism, posthumanism. We're going to talk about AI and the role of AI in the future of humanity, all those sorts of fun things. And then the final week, what I'd like to do is take a week and talk about what happens when we die from an individual perspective. So it will be what we call individual eschatology. We're not looking necessarily at the timeline of events, millenniums and things like that. What we're going to look at is the individual and what happens. What's the expectation and what's the biblical understanding of what happens after death? Okay, so that's what we will do for the remainder of our time. So it'll end up being 9 weeks total, Lord willing, after we finish this series. Okay, so created, not constructed, and we're looking at this conversation about ethics today. How would you define ethics? What would you, just a sort of layman's definition, ethics, what do we mean when we say ethics? Anything? Yeah, applied morality, that's probably a good, comprehensive enough, definition for us. Yeah, anybody else? What do you think when you think of ethics? Doing right when nobody's watching, that's good, because that's tapping into more than just the decision you make. It's tapping into the character of the person making the decision, which I think is really important, actually. Yeah. Doing the right thing. It is. Ethics is those things. It's also a level above that of figuring out what the right thing is, right? That's kind of precedes, right, the conversation about what is right. That precedes the conversation about doing right. So we could, textbook sort of definition, we could say that ethics is the disciplined inquiry into what is morally right and good. All right? Disciplined inquiry into what's morally right and good. One of the reasons I love studying ethics so much, and I love teaching it and leading these types of conversations, is because everybody has to do ethics. All right? Everybody in this room, you're making decisions about right and wrong all the time. When you're having a conversation, when you're making medical decisions. Boy, you get hit with some quandaries real fast that you didn't expect to see coming. But all of a sudden, you're having to make those decisions. You're having to stand at the bedside, maybe, of someone that you love, and you're having to make decisions, and you're wanting to do what's right or wrong. You get stuck in sticky situations sometimes with family, with, what should I do about this? With money. Should you lend money to your son or daughter? I'm thinking adult children here. How should you do that? Should you drop a contract? Is that okay? Should you lend without them repaying you? Is it even smart? Should you have a cosigner? Like, how do you manage these things? And it's easy enough, and we'll get into this. It's easy enough to just ask the question, what does the Bible say? Like, well, nothing exactly about that, right? And that's where we've got to learn how to reason with what the Scripture says, because what it gives us is foundational principles from which to reason. It doesn't answer every specific question with the type of specificity that sometimes we want and need to be able to make decisions. Okay, so we're getting into this ethics and morality kinds of conversation. The other thing I would say by way of introduction is everybody's having this debate. Right, we're going to have this conversation in the context of what a Christian biblical perspective and kind of some different understandings and views and how we navigate with the Bible. So our conversation is kind of narrow in that sense, but the whole world is debating what's right and wrong. Have you noticed that? I hear people say something like this sometimes. Well, we've lost our morals in this country. I'm like, I don't think so. I think we're just questioning the moral standard by which we're judging things, right? If you don't think we're moral people, I'll give you a list of words to post on social media this afternoon, and a list of little slogans and statements, and you just fire them out and see what happens. Tell me if we're not making moral judgments. The question is, who's making the moral judgments? There's 1,000 cultural issues we could point to. Yep. Interesting. Yeah, nothing new under the sun, right? This is not new. We got a few financial people around. We remember the ESG investing. Mike, you're familiar with that, I'm sure. Are you hearing much about that anymore, or where is that? Right. So the ESG, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And basically, you would score. Mike, help me with the details. Is that right? Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So interesting. It's a moral code for investors, though. And that's my point. It's a moral code. So basically, what you would do is you take a company. I don't know. Whatever I say is politically loaded, so I'll just pick one at random. Target. All right. Yeah, that one's politically loaded too. I know, bad example. Like, pick one though. Like Home Depot. Okay. I know. Like everybody you name, you can't pick one. You can't pick one. So let's just use Target. So we'll take Target. You would take how are they on the environment? What are their practices? How do they run their stores? Are they using renewables, renewable energy, things like that? And so they would get an environmental grade. ES, social, like are they involved? Are they involved socially? Are they, what kind of political, statements are they making? That sort of thing. And then governance, the governance, what's the governmental representation, on their board, and diversity, and like all these sorts of things. And there's, how are decisions made? And so basically, you get a score, you get a composite score, and that's kind of for the investor that's conscious and aware of those things. You would say, oh, they scored well, so I'm going to invest in this company. Part of the reason, I think there's two things that have kind of happened to squelch this. One, we had a major political change at the White House, all right, which tends to affect a lot of things, as you are aware. So, moving from, Democrat to Republican in the White House, not to mention a very outspoken Republican, President Trump, who was, not exactly a fan of these types of things, all right? You're aware of that. So that happened, and the companies are falling in line because there's money attached to this federal funding. So you have that, and then I think the second thing is most investors were like, that's cute, but I want to make money. And at the end of the day, like that drives things. So I use that just as an example to say, everybody's making decisions, and everybody's got a moral compass and code. Our question is, what's driving it? Who gets to decide what's right and wrong? And so today we're going to talk about two different levels of this. I'm going to introduce some ethical theories, and then we're going to do some workshop type of things. And I don't know exactly where that's going to go, so this will be fun. So we'll find out together exactly what we're going to talk about, because I really want to hear your thoughts and work through this. Okay, so we're going to talk about right and wrong, and then level 2 is really talking about like a better and best kind of idea. So let's talk about ethical theories. There are 3 major ethical theories, and this is I'm going to talk about these from a Christian, sort of embedded Christian perspective, but just know these are 3 theories that kind of stand outside of the Christian tradition even. So when we ask the question that ethics is asking, what is right and wrong? How do we get there? Before you make a decision, how do you actually know the category of right and wrong? And I would argue a society can't actually function if it doesn't have some working definition of right and wrong. It just implodes on itself, and it turns into, Hunger Games or something. Just anarchy. It's anarchy, right? Might makes right. That's all it is. Okay, so consequentialism says that the morally right action is the one that produces the best overall outcome or consequence. And this is the whole ends justify the means argument. Now, you can spot the slippery slope here real quick, right? Could be some problems with this. We'll get to those in just a second. But just get the theory first. The right thing to do in any given situation is what gets you the best outcome. If that means lying to someone because you can perceive that a good outcome is going to come from lying, that means doing it. You can judge actions in retrospect. What if somebody was drowning in the intercoastal, you jumped in and you tried to save them, and you didn't, and you drowned as well? somebody could look at that and say they did the wrong thing because they got a bad outcome. I think many of us would look at that and say, no, they did the right thing because they, chose courage and bravery over, self-protection. And so, but consequentialism would just say, no, it was wrong because it got a bad outcome. So that's it. That's the end of the line. Okay, principle-oriented says the morally right action is based on duties and rules that are binding regardless of consequences. So this is getting more into where Christians are comfortable talking. So it's based on duties and rules. The question, of course, especially with non-Christian ethics, is who gets to write the duties and rules? Who gets to decide that ESG is the right way to invest, right? Who decided that? And that's the pushback in question. So principle-oriented, aside and apart from God's word, is a dead-end street. And then lastly, virtue ethics. And this is what some of the Greek philosophers, Aristotle and others, they really leaned into this idea. Ethics is primarily about character rather than rules or outcomes. So what the state does, what the city does, in Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, these guys, and I'm like simplifying and probably oversimplifying, but the idea is that we just have to produce good humans. And so whatever the factory has to do to produce good humans, that's what you do. And that's the right action in a given situation and circumstance. All right, so let's take these apart. Yep.
About virtue ethics and the Luigi Mangione case that is going on out there. When you talk about character, who judges what is right? Whose character is right? Because you have people out there supporting him and millions of dollars in his defense fund about somebody that did what he did. And you're like, so who's judging character? Right?
Yeah, who gets to make that determination? That's the big struggle that we're in right now, I think, as a country, really. Yeah, good question. Okay, so let's take these apart, because I think there's some grains of truth in each of them, and I think there's some real dangers if you only have any one of these. Okay, so that's how I want to approach it, and I'll just, the saying we have in academia is, if you steal from one, it's plagiarism. If you steal from many, it's research. All right, so, and as long as you cite your sources, you're good. So I'm borrowing some from a guy named Dennis Hollinger. He wrote a book called Creation and Christian Ethics. I found it very helpful. I went to a seminar he did a few years ago, and it was very useful. And he was actually previewing this book before it came out, and then when it came out, I picked it up, and I found it helpful. So I don't follow Hollinger on every single thing, just so you know, but I do find him helpful for this. Okay, so let's talk about consequentialism. Let's talk about what it gets right, first of all, because I think people like me, we're pretty quick to dismiss consequentialism because we see the slippery slope, and there is a very slippery slope there. But what it gets right is consequences actually matter, all right? Consequences do matter. Proverbs, there's a lot of Proverbs that talk about considering the outcome. Make plans. See what's going to happen. Make decisions for the long term. So we do need to consider that, even in like desperate situations and circumstances. When you're on the airlines and what do they always tell you? Put your own mask on first, right? I think there's actually wisdom in that. Most people aren't sitting there thinking of the philosophical and ethical implications like I am, of like, wonder if they're deontological ethics is kind of undergirding this whole, but that's welcome to my head. It's a strange place. So, yeah, I think there's a consequence. So if you don't do this, you're going to get this, and this outcome is not going to be good. So there's wisdom in asking the question of what will happen if I do this. All right, I think that's a perfectly reasonable, even biblical idea and question. When we're talking sometimes as elders, and we make a decision, and we'll say, hey, does this set a precedent? What's the potential outcome of this circumstance or situation? Or you set a policy, and you try to think through, how could this be used in ways that you didn't intend it? What's the outcome? What's the outflow? So I don't think that's wrong. I don't think it's wrong to think that way. I think we're all doing it, and I don't think it's wrong just to say it. So where it is incomplete, this could, in extreme circumstances, permit or even require monstrous acts if they produce a desired outcome. And you can use your imagination here on what all could be justified under this, well, this would be better. And, I don't love that we always end up talking about the Nazis, but let's talk about the Nazis, because it's such a clear example. If you get in your head that this would be a better world if we eliminate these people, well then, that's the right thing to do, if that's your ethical foundation. Now, the whole logic skewed of what is good, which is a whole nother conversation. But you could see, though, if the outcome is all you think about, that's a problem. There's no room for intrinsic rights, duties, or the dignity of the image bearer. And so I think that's where you have to really stop on consequentialism and say this isn't just consequences. So it has some things right and it has some things wrong. Principle-oriented, or what's called deontological in the ethical jargon, that's what it's called, principle-based ethics. So what it gets right. And of course, this is probably the most, this resonates quickly with us, right, as Christians. Because we're people of the Bible. What does the Bible say? That settles things. The Bible has authority, and we don't apologize for that. So I very much lean into this concept. So some actions are right or wrong, not just inconvenient, okay? It's not just an inconvenient and doesn't just produce a bad outcome. It's right and wrong. Human beings have dignity that cannot be violated for the greater good. And I would say, going back to our, you guys probably saw the story. I didn't keep up. I know there was a lot of different things said about this, but there was a kid on the cruise ship that went over the balcony. Did you guys see this? There's a kid on a cruise ship, went over the balcony, and the dad just immediately jumped, and it was off pretty high level on the cruise ship, and ended up saving the girl, and turns out to be a great story. And of course, everybody wrote everything about it after that, which we'll ignore that for just a second. But I think we all look at that and go, "Way to go, Dad! Way to go, Dad! That was the right thing to do." If he hadn't made it, and if that had not been successful, I would sit here and say, that was absolutely the right thing to do. Yeah, go in. What are you going to do? Stand there on the balcony and say, that stinks. What are you going to do? What's the right thing to do? What if there's little chance that this is going to be successful? You still do it because it's right. And so Christians are very much wired that way. And we are people of principle and people of the book. So the Ten Commandments, you get the clarity of the Ten Commandments. Don't worship other gods. Don't lie. Don't murder. Don't commit adultery. These are right things to do. And we would stake our lives on them. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, they could have made an argument that, hey, I think if we just bow to this idol, it would be better so that we could stay alive and have influence for the Lord in this community, right? You could have easily made that case, but they said, no, God's word says this, and I'm going to stand for it. So, yeah, we're there. Isaiah 55, my thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways are not your ways. So we have to, when we hit something hard, lean into God's perspective and understanding. I don't understand what's going on here, but God does. His ways are not my ways. So it is incomplete, though, because you hit areas that are areas of Christian freedom, areas that are not directly addressed by Scripture with the type of specificity that we sometimes want. Let's talk about, this has got all kinds of potential this whole morning to just go, and that's okay. If you guys want to chase some rabbits, we'll chase rabbits. Areas of Christian freedom, something like drinking alcohol. Some people grew up in a context where they're teetotalers. This is just absolutely wrong. Other people would say, no, the psalm we looked at last week, wine gladdens the spirit. Well, that ain't grape juice. And I always laugh about that. Christians are like, well, the wine in the New Testament and the Old Testament, it's not the same thing. I'm like, Paul said don't get drunk. How much grape juice do you have to drink to get, that doesn't work, like for me. Like, no, it's alcoholic. Like it was alcoholic. Let's just like be clear. Like that doesn't work at all for me. So is it okay or is it not? Do you have a single verse that you can just point to and answer the question? And I would say now we're getting into, what I would call ethics 2.0. We're moving up to say, all right, we got to reason from wisdom in Scripture. And I would say in that case, in a Romans 14 sort of way, it sort of depends. It depends. You have to inform your own mind and heart and conscience on these things. So I'll leave that there for now. We'll come back to that one in just a second. It's also incomplete that we have to consider the role of affections and desires. And getting into a little bit of what we'll see next with the character, it's lacking that if you only have this. Application in novel situations, which requires some reasoning. Novel situation meaning, I'll use technology again, for example. Let's say the use of AI. Is it ethical for Christians to use AI? It's like, well, what does the Bible say? Right? Now we're doing ethics 2.0. Now we're having to take the biblical data, put together what we think a human is, what do we think AI is, what are the consequences, and so now we're having to do some reasoning. So this is not a closed system. It doesn't answer everything. Jeffy?
And her family had to decide whether lying was righteous or this is the area.
This is great transition, Jeffy. Awesome. We're going to talk about, so let's use, all right, so we got three people, again, reductio ad Hitlerum. We're back to Hitler in our conversation. Second World War, we have three examples of these three positions. All right, so these are absolute positions, meaning, when I say absolutism, people that believe there is a right and a wrong. All right, that's different from a moral relativist that just says the situation determines right and wrong. All right, so these are people that do believe there is a right and wrong. There is such a thing. One would be a non-conflicting absolutist. This means God's absolute commands never conflict with each other in real life situations. Corrie ten Boom's sister, Betsy, was a non-conflicting absolutist. I don't know that she ever used those terms, but that's in practice what she was. She said, you can't lie. It doesn't matter, the consequences. You tell the truth and you trust the Lord. All right? So they tell a story. There was time when this young man's being chased by the German troops that have moved in there to Haarlem there in the Netherlands, and they go running into the house, into the ten Boom house, and at the time they had a trap door under the kitchen table. And they open the trap door, stuff them in, pull the rug back over, set the dinner table, and they're just sitting there like this, and the officers come to the door, knock on the door. Where's the young man that just ran by? Betsy speaks up and says, they're under the table, and starts laughing hysterically, like sarcastically, like they're under the table, ha, ha, ha. Well, there's a open table, and there's obviously nothing there. And the soldiers get mad and just walk out. So her perspective was like, that's how you handle it. I told the truth. And so the idea is there's always a way to tell the truth that doesn't conflict with something else, all right, with another of God's principles. All right, so that's Betsy. Conflicting absolutism, different guy, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer wrote a book on ethics, and it was published posthumously, so it's not as clean as it probably would have been if he hadn't died. He died at 39 years old, never got martyred, never got a chance to really finish that one. So Bonhoeffer said, sometimes Christians in a fallen world have to sin, but it's okay because God forgives us. All right, so he took this position of conflicting absolutism. So going back to the SS officer knocks on the door, says, where are the Jews? He would say, you're under obligation to lie, which is wrong, but God will forgive you. That was kind of his view. All right, so that's number two. Corrie ten Boom, Corrie took the third position. I don't know that she ever used these terms either. Says that God's commands are absolute, but operate on a hierarchy of binding force. Some commands are more fundamental than others, protecting life by lying is an example. So Corrie Corey did all kinds of shady stuff. And if you guys ever read The Hiding Place, there's a lot there, like ethical things, stealing ration cards, fabricating documents, hiding Jews, lying to officers. Like, she was basically an operative, wearing a middle-aged, Netherland-looking, sweet lady riding her bike around, woman. She's basically an operative. And then, eventually she gets found out and gets in trouble. And that's where the whole Hiding Place story, takes off from. But she took this approach that I'm going to do what I can to save life because it's the greater good. And so this is the greater good kind of argument. But the key is I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm doing what's right, even though I have to lie or fabricate documents or that sort of thing. Okay? That's where I would land. I would say there are times and places where, and it's rare, and I get it, like as soon as you put somebody on this slope, you're like, yikes, what have I just done? So I feel that very much, but I think in the real world, I think this is how it works because of the effects of sin. Yep.
That said to Pharaoh.
Yeah, for better or worse, we're tracking today. The Hebrew midwives is such an interesting story. It's such an interesting story. So we got this massive population explosion of the slave people in Egypt. Pharaoh gets nervous, says, I want you to kill all the baby boys. And the midwives, and then they aren't. Pharaoh's looking around a little while later going, what's up with all these baby boys? I thought we were supposed to be killing them, and we're not. So he calls in the midwives, like, you guys are responsible for this. The midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. Okay. I have heard all kinds of different versions of this, saying that this is a version of the non-conflicting absolutism, that they are absolutely telling the truth, and these women just all have babies before we can get there. Like, do they? That seems improbable to me. It just seems improbable. If that's your position, that's fine. I understand why people want to hold that position. Just seems really unlikely that that's what's said. Verse 20, partly because of this. So God dealt well with the midwives. Because of what? Because they deceived Pharaoh. That's why. And protected life. And the people multiplied and grew very strong, and because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. So you see the blessing of God because they did this thing. I think this is a perfect example of the graded absolutism position. There's extreme, dire circumstances. There's the higher good of, I'm not going to murder. I cannot murder. So I am going to this authority that's ungodly, telling me to do something that's directly sinful. I am going to, under the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, he's a lesser, I'm obeying the greater. I'm obeying God, not him, in this situation because he's put me in this conflict, and that's right, and God commends him for that. Yep. Rahab. Yep, another example. I almost put that one up too, but I think that's the same logic. Yeah, I think it's the same logic.
There's examples of that as well. When you say to do this, but God says,
yeah, Acts 5, they say, hey, we're going to let you guys go, but you can't preach about Christ anymore. And they're like, yeah, forget you. We're going to obey God rather than man. Jesus said to go preach, so we have to do that, even though you're telling me something. So, yeah, it's another example of this graded, there's an unrighteous decree, and you're actually under obligation to disobey the unrighteous decree in that situation. Even though the Bible says obey your government, which, hey, this could lead us off into squirrely directions. But even though the Bible says that, and it does say that clearly, Romans 13, but when there is an unrighteous decree, I think we're under obligation to size that up and to disobey and obey God rather than man. The authority, governmental authority is always limited, and it's derived from God. That's what Jesus says. You have no authority. He's speaking to Pilate. Pilate's like, don't you know I have authority over you? Like, answer my question. He's like, you don't have any authority. God has all authority. You got this all wrong. You're underneath him. So I think we have to consider that and think about that. All right. Other thoughts on that? Fun stuff. Okay, so the last one, virtue ethics. So we've talked about consequentialism, what it gets right, what it gets wrong. Talked about this principle-oriented, or we could just call like Bible-driven deontological ethics. And then let's talk about virtue ethics. What it gets right. I think we need to think a lot more about virtue and character formation as it relates to decision making. Even things like the use of AI, let's say, for example. Every technology, I'm jumping into next week a little bit, but think about this phrase. Every technology is both an amplification and an amputation. All right, process that for a second. Every use of technology is an amplification and an amputation. How many people's phone numbers do you know? A handful, right? And exactly. I remember my best friend's phone number from when we were in 5-year-old kindergarten. But I know my wife's number. Sometimes I know my kids' numbers. And I know my mom's number because she hadn't changed it in like 30 years. Amplification and amputation. We use phones now, which store numbers, which means you don't have to memorize numbers anymore. Most people are using that. So the amplification is I have hundreds, if not thousands of numbers in my phone. That's the amplification. The amputation is I don't know anybody's number, and you don't either. A lot of you don't. This is embarrassing, but I'll tell you anyways. I was fiddling around with something the other day, and I started doing long division just on a piece of paper. I was trying to figure something out, and I had to pause for just a second. Like, wait a minute. I'm like, okay, yeah, I remember, like, from 4th grade, learning long division. Any of y'all try to do long division recently, like without a piece of paper or without a calculator? So amplification and amputation. Amplification is I can figure out any percentage I want in 10 seconds, with my phone and calculator now. The amputation is I'm not great with like paper number, crunching these things. Some of you that live in the financial world, maybe your head is just so wired to do that. But that's what I'm getting at, though. Everything we do is shaping us into something. The question is, are we really stopping to ask what it's shaping us into? Tools have an effect. Yep.
Those were no longer, but you couldn't use those for a while.
Yeah.
Then those were okay, and then you couldn't use a calculator, and then,
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Joke that they tell you, like, you're not going to be, when you grow up, you're not going to have a calculator with you
You
all
won't
the
have a
time.
calculator everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, oh, want to bet? Right. Yeah.
We watch Star Trek, we know.
Yeah, this is how it works. Yeah, my favorite was always like when the kids, our kids or kids I taught, like, when am I ever going to use this? I'm like, when's the test? They're like, Thursday. I'm like, Thursday. You're going to use it on Thursday. So just learn how to do it and get over it. Like, I was very sympathetic. Okay, so I think we need to be asking the questions about what's this making us? What are we doing? What's our habits? Just imagine this. Especially if you're younger, or I guess it doesn't just apply, but it's exponential if you're younger. Imagine the person you want to be, and every decision you make is sort of like a little tiny data point, and it's taking you somewhere. So all the little decisions, it's like millions of little and trillions of little hinges. How you spend your day, what you read, friends you choose to have, where you choose to go, the habits you choose to form daily. And it's like these little hinges, and it's leading you somewhere. And so the technology that you choose to use, the scripture, the friends that you choose to have, they're all little hinges. And so just back up from that. Jonathan Edwards, one of his resolutions was, I may butcher it, but something to the effect of, think of the person you want to be at the end and order your life towards that, right? How do I get there? What do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? What's going to get me there? And I tell my students sometimes, especially the upper level, it's like if you open up a biography about a great man, great woman, people from history, like it doesn't start with they got up at 11 and ate Fruity Pebbles and watched SportsCenter. Like, that's not what makes greatness. I'm sorry. It's just not. So, like, what's going to shape me into this kind of person? And that needs to drive. And so now we're moving into not necessarily a right or a wrong always, but a better best, kind of situation and circumstance. Okay, so virtue ethics matters. What kind of person I'm becoming matters. It's incomplete, though. It, of course, can't be the only motivation. We can't leave out the clear commands of Scripture. And then this is an important point, I think, that our reasoning is flawed because of, the term is the noetic effects of sin. Our reasoning is flawed, so you can justify all sorts of things. You've done this. That's why I think it's important to do this in community. And it's important to have friends around you that will slap you upside the head occasionally when you're making decisions. Hey, not a good call, bad idea, because you can talk yourself into all sorts of nonsense with the decision. And so you need friends. You need accountability around you to help you think clearly and straight. I've watched this a dozen times, and you guys have too, and we've probably all done it, like at some level. Oh, I'm going to buy this because, it's going to turn me into this, whatever person. It's like, is it? Like, really? I think you're convincing yourself something's true that's not. So be careful with that. So I think it's wise to synthesize these approaches, and this is the approach that Hollinger goes on. So when we're dealing with an issue, I think we first ask the question, creation, what is this for? How did God design it? What does this speak to, creation design? Consequences, what does this produce in persons and communities? What's the potential here? Character, what kind of person does this form over time in the individual and in the community? So I think I may have given you this before, but it's a good opportunity to throw this out again. Something like social media. Should Christians participate in social media? It's like, well, what does the Bible say? Nothing about Facebook or Meta in particular, right? TikTok's not in the Bible, I don't think. So, like, how do you reason from that? Well, we know that God has created humans for community, right? First thing we learn that's not good before sin is that man is not to be alone. So community's good. All right, we got that going for us. Consequences. What does this produce? Well, there's some positive and negative, right? There's connection with old friends that you don't get to see anymore. The gospel has spread to people. There's negatives as well. You can use it for self-promotion. Terrible things have happened. People have been trafficked. Like, there's awful things that have happened because social media exists. And then character. What kind of person does this produce? Well, maybe you're using it to read devotionals and become more like Christ. Maybe you're just watching what everybody else has and the highlight reels of their life, and it's producing in you an envious, jealous, kind of bitter, angry person because you don't go on the trips and don't get the cool things. So you got to think about this. And I think it's a composite way to look at this. All right, I'll pause there. There's more to say, but I want to pause and catch us up, processing, or any examples that you guys want to try to work through the grid and see, like, what would we say about a particular thing? Thoughts?
Back to your Nazi example, on the Nazis wanting to get rid of the Jews. Always one of those things I pondered. Probably should read a biography about it, but the guys that piloted the planes that dropped the atomic bombs from Japan, by orders from the president and everything else. But what went through their minds, and because they had a long time to fly, think and talk about what they were doing and what would happen, the consequences.
Yeah. There's a book about it's called Countdown 1945, about the dropping of the bomb. One of the things that stuck out to me in that book is the pilots weren't actually convinced that they were going to live. Because they didn't know, especially with the first one, like, are we just going to get consumed? Are we going to have time to get out of the blast radius? And,
One that might strike a little closer to home.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the examples, right, to put through the grid. Do we take an elderly parent in, or is it okay to put it in the senior facility?
Oh, boy.
I'm just hypothetical.
All right, let's play with it. What do you guys think? Creation, what do we know?
They're made in the image of God and they deserve the best care.
Made in the image of God and deserve the best care possible. Yeah.
Honor your mother and father.
Honor your mother and father. Yep. What else? Popcorn here. What else would you say? What are the responsibilities?
Someone doesn't take care of their family, they're worse than an unbeliever.
Yeah, First Timothy 5:8, is that right? I think, yeah, if you don't take care of your family, you're worse than an unbeliever. There's an expectation,
Do unto others.
as you would have them do unto you, which doesn't just mean you do what you would want done. It means that you consider their perspective on what they would want done, which I think is important for that conversation. Okay? Consequences, good and bad. Give them to me.
Horror stories in nursing homes. You hear
Yeah.
them all the time.
Abuse of elderly happens.
And I'm aware of very positive stories in community, in
Let's-
nursing homes. Social interaction, activities.
We're not created to live apart from community, so it creates some of that. Yep.
Sometimes you're not equipped.
You're just not equipped. I think that's a huge piece of the puzzle here. Sometimes you just can't, like physically yourself, or because of life and schedule and things like that. It's easy to say, and I'll just bring this one up as well. Financial burden. There's a massive financial implication here. Some people are able to afford this. Some people aren't. Some people would say, oh, I would never do a nursing home. And sometimes they're very well-resourced people who hire 24-hour care. I'm like, well, that's, money-wise, I don't know that it's that much different. I don't know the complete economics of that. But, yeah, there's a financial piece of this as well that I think is worth considering. Yeah, what else?
In deciding how to vote, is there a category of bad and worse?
Yeah.
Or is it always just better and best?
Yeah, voting.
No better
Let's
than
let's do that one next. Let's pause on that for just a second and finish the grid here on like nursing home, that question of elderly care. So I think there's the consequences need to be considered carefully. Consequences. Character. What do you guys think about this? What kind of person does this produce in communities and individuals? Net positive, net negative?
Example for children, how you care for, I think how you care for your parents is a sign to them of how, how they would care for someone, whether it's you or anyone else, and
how you honor them.
Yeah, how you honor them. Yeah, good. Yeah.
An opportunity to model the importance of praying before making decisions
Mm.
and of seeking wise counsel of others who would be prayer warriors with you.
Yeah, good. Praying, seeking counsel, trying to really. I think this grid is helpful. This doesn't tell you everything, but it's a helpful way to start thinking, and it pulls us beyond like the simplicity sometimes of making those decisions. Yeah.
We were blessed to be able to take care of both my mom and Shannon's mom and dad to their end stages of life. Neither one of them were combative. So we
Uh-huh.
didn't have, blow-ups in the household, anything like that. So in our case, it was relatively easy. And we
Yeah.
were together on it. In other situations, if that person who's going through dementia, for example, is combative all the time, that could be a real issue.
It could be a huge issue.
Even a safety issue.
A safety issue as well. I think you have to consider that. Are there other people in the home? What's the implications of that? I think the big question, like, are you equipped, is a massive question. This could be something you have to consider with other siblings or family members as well. Is there a route that, if you have, there's 5 of us in my family. If 4 people are absolute convinced, and my family, they're all believers, and if we had to face a situation with my mom, let's say, if 4 of them were absolutely convinced that one path was right, and I was the holdout thinking, no, I don't think that's a good idea, I should consider that. I should consider that and say, okay, maybe there's some things some dynamics I'm not understanding, and so for the sake of my family, I might just choose to go with this decision. You talk it out, of course. So So yeah, I don't know that I didn't, it's not a simple yes or no. It's not a simple right or wrong. I think you have to think through these things individually. Yes, Sue?
If you disagree, are you prepared to bear the cost
Yeah.
of getting your way? Because sometimes what would seem expedient to the others and the smart move, and you're not ready for that move, or
Yeah.
you think there needs to be modifications, and they do not. Are you ready for the cost?
Yep, and that would play into this consequence idea. You better consider that. Yep.
And I think most of our decisions, we've got to be able to go back and say, okay, now that we've made a decision, maybe we want to see how long this, you know,
Yes.
is it or do we want to reconsider?
Yes.
Give ourselves some grace to make changes in our judgment.
That's such an important point. Yeah. I'll-
Responsibility doesn't change regardless of whatever decision you make. So
Yes.
responsibility may look a little bit different, but it's not clear cut. Like if you choose to keep them in the home with you, you are responsible bodily for them as well in your home. But if you can't just drop them off somewhere and be like it's somebody else's.
Yeah, see you later.
Financially I'm responsible for them, but that's it. So you still have responsibility regardless of what choice you make.
And I think it's possible to do that. I think it's possible to do both of those, good and bad, right? Both keeping in the home in a poor way, but then also
Yeah, then,
outsourcing.
the other part of that, of the character thing is, the people around that person who've made that decision, how are they judging that decision based
Yeah.
on their own preferences, and then looking at your friend or colleague or person at church, whatever, and judging them on the decision they've made without really, you're not involved,
Yeah.
you're not in the situation.
You can't understand all the dynamics. Yep.
I was thinking on the character question, we've got the question, what kind of person does this produce? Right?
Uh-huh.
But I think it also, in leading into it, like, what kind of character does this reveal in
Yeah.
this decision-making
Yeah.
process, right? Like, why do I want, or think this is the best decision? Do I think it because in my heart, I just this is easier for me? Or do I like, this is,
Right.
oh, this is revealing the love that I have for this person, or this is revealing some selfishness in my heart?
Right.
Like, and it gets hard.
It does get hard. So this is a much, so those are all, I think, super helpful thoughts and hopefully give us something to think about. So this is a much lighter example. Where we lived, we'll end with this. Where we lived back in Mobile, we lived on this kind of main frontage road kind of area, and we used to do these gigantic yard sales, like multifamily. It looked like a bazaar, a little market set up out front. And I remember at one point I asked Minnie, I was like, what would I have to pay you to not do this? And like, you can have it. Like this is, I mean, because there's just stuff everywhere, tubs and containers, people dropping stuff off, and we're filtering through things and going to the dumps afterwards. And I'm like, I don't know what we made, but I don't think it was worth it. But Mindy's actually good with that kind of stuff, and like, she and her friends had fun. So, but I think, to Nathan's point, that whole thing revealed more about me than anything else. Like, I'm just lazy and I don't want to help with this. Like, at the end of the day, like, that's what was driving me. Like, this wasn't financial. It was just, I'm a lazy human and I don't want to help with this. So I think, decisions a lot of times, you can try talking around things and justify it all the ways you want, but I think it's revealing something about us, and it's shaping us as well. All right, Jeffy, we didn't get to voting. Next time. All right, next time. Okay, I got to let you go. We'll pick it up next week. Lord, thanks for your word. I thank you that it is sufficient and it's authoritative, and it helps us think through these situations, help us to think biblically, to not make excuses for things like sin or not justify things like pride or laziness or any of that, but to think well